Some months ago, Ram Dass and I were talking about the possibility of putting together a conference on the spiritual potentials involved in any crisis situation, but particularly with AIDS. And we had ideas of maybe a very large thing as a benefit to many of the groups actually who sponsored this. But as we looked at it, we saw things were changing so quickly. So much knowledge was coming up so rapidly that almost nothing could be planned 9 months in advance. That then we would just go in there with a model that may have already well decayed behind us. This event came up much more organically. Talking to Daniel, he said, "Would you like to visit 5B?" And here we are on 5B. 5B is the AIDS ward at, is it San Francisco General? Maybe if we saw this as 5B, as though it weren't happening to someone else, as though we weren't innocent bystanders, this process, whatever it may be today, might be yet more powerful. To look at this now, here, as 5B, feel your body now as though it was on 5B, not in, quote, safe territory. So that you don't just listen, but instead you participate. So that we aren't touching the pain in others' bodies, in others' minds, with fear. Ram Dass and I were looking at the title of the event. It's called Healing into the Heart of AIDS. Ram Dass said, well, you know, dying isn't mentioned anywhere in that circular. And it was really evident how small, how shallow we may consider healing, how we may miss the point, and that healing may not well be changing the nature of the body. I don't quite know what healing is, but my sense of it is, the process of it is to touch with love that which you've so often touched with fear and anger and hatred. It seems that when we're starting to move toward making room for ourselves, making room for our pain, making room for our joy in our heart, the healing is happening. And whether or not it's manifested in the body may be secondary. Some of the most miraculous healings I have ever seen were people on the way to dying. The healing they took birth for seemed to come to completion. Yet the body didn't reflect that healing. Though they left no traces of unfinished business, no broken hearts, no closed minds, they did what they could to finish, to touch with love that which they may have touched with confusion in their past. They healed their life, not just their body.
I would like to be very personal for a moment. I really wanted to be here today because I felt that it would be a gathering that would be reaching for truth. And that we would approach territory that maybe we have to hold hands to approach. It looked up until 3 days ago that I couldn't be here as Stephen Levine's friend because I was busy helping my stepmother to complete her work and leave her body. And she indeed left her body in my arms Monday. And in the last 12 days when I was nursing her, both of us got healed by the process. Not just Phyllis. She finished her work. In those 12 days, we talked about the mystery. We talked about pain. We talked about life. We talked about family. We did a will. We did all the banking business. We took pills and went to the bathroom. And our souls touched so tenderly in the presence of this intensely real process that we were sharing. Not alone, the two of us, my father, her husband was there. He's 87, so he was a quiet participant. And other people helping. And I had a chance through those days to see all the little corners in me that run and hide into concepts, into pat formulas. At one point I was saying all the wise words. I think I had stolen them from Stephen. I was doing a pain meditation. Phyllis at one point said to me, I don't understand the pain. And I was saying, explore it, relax, open. And I was doing it up in here at that moment. She put her hand on my leg and she said, stop talking. My ego went, whoop. But I realized that the realness of what we were experiencing together was more real than all those words were at that moment. And that our presence together was so true for both of us that it was something we could open into and feel fulfilled even in this process, which everybody around was looking at as, isn't this horrible? I would walk out of the room with Phyllis as she went to sleep, and I'd go out of the room, and I would be, I wouldn't say in bliss, but I was in ecstasy, ecstasis, out of the static. I was not in my conceptual mind. I was just in the moment. I was just present in the moment. It was just so intense. And the telephone would ring, and it would be somebody, and they'd say, "Oh, you're so courageous to be doing this. Aren't you kind? Aren't you wonderful? How horrible this must be for you." And if I even suggested to them that it wasn't horrible, I could feel the sense of incomprehension come into their minds. There was no way they could understand. I remember attending my mother's funeral in 1966. And I had taken LSD to go to the funeral because it seemed reasonable to me. I mean, I wanted to enjoy the funeral. I wanted to be with her. And so the way the funeral was staged, it was a big funeral, and there were some extraordinary moments in the funeral. I digress for just one extraordinary moment. There was the casket was up in front in the temple, and there was a blanket of red roses on the casket. My father always gave my mother one red rose on their anniversary. And my mother gave my father one red rose. They had been doing that for 40-odd years. As the casket was being wheeled out of the temple, it came abreast of the first pew where my father was sitting with us. And it went by, and one red rose fell off the casket at my father's feet. My father leaned over and picked it up. We all went out and we got into the big black Cadillac, and everybody came up to the window and said their thing. And my brother said, in the car, me, my brother, one brother who is a lawyer and his wife, very conservative, one brother who is very expansive in his consciousness, you could say, and me, my father. My expanded brother said, "It looks like Mother sent you a message." And everybody in the car agreed. In that moment, the intensity of the emotion, everybody agreed. They all, in a way, rose up out of themselves. At any other time, 3/4 of that audience would have said, "What are you, out of your mind? It was just an error, the rose fell off." Immediately, we had to preserve the rose, call places to get a glass thing to hold it. And then as the years went by, it turned brown because the process didn't work. And then, of course, we didn't know what to do with this kind of dark, dirty water. And I went into the garage and behind a box, and I found it, and I thought, there's the last message. Trying to preserve that which changes. It's ephemeral. Can't hold the message. Well, that wasn't why I'm telling you the story. The reason I'm telling the story was because we went to the cemetery. And the way they stage it at the cemetery is the family is on one side of the hole, and all the mourners are on the other side so they can look at the family. And we're all standing there in dark suits. I was, at that moment, my mother and I were whispering to each other, because remember, I'm on acid. And she and I were enjoying, and we were saying to each other, look at the web of love that you have been immersed in this lifetime. And all of the love of all these people, and how powerful it is. And we were all, I was just I was in delight, I was in bliss. And at one moment I realized, as they watched us, that if I smiled at that moment, he's the one that takes drugs. And I experienced that same thing this week. That Phyllis and I were in a space that was so intimately clear and present. And it was very hard to find who I could share that with. But who was willing to consider the possibility that something as profound as the process of leaving your body could bring people into the moment so thoroughly that they could be fulfilled. Fulfilled. And she died Monday, and I arranged for Dad to be taken care of so I could come here to be with you, because I thought you'd understand. And I thought we could come into deep truth together today. But the point that I made before was not just that Phyllis was being healed, but that I was being healed. About a week ago, I attended a meeting for a support group for volunteers who are buddies for people that have AIDS. It was a group of 7 people. They had been meeting for many months, intimately, openly, trustingly. And they had to give permission, every one of them, for me to be present, which they did kindly. Because I wanted to come as a fly on the wall just to hear what was happening. They each went around the room, and each one of them described in considerable detail what was happening in their particular relationship with their buddy. And I had come wondering whether I had anything to contribute. And by the end of the meeting, I felt that I did. And that reassured me that I would have something to contribute today. Because what I saw was incredible caring, incredible kindness, incredible reaching out beyond themselves. Many of these people had full-time jobs in service, and then evenings they were going out, as many of you are, to serve even more. But what I saw in one form or another was burnout, 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 burnout. There was some way in which the richness and the intensity, it was like they were plugged into 220 instead of 110. It was so intensely real, and the way they were standing in relation to it was such that they were feeling overloaded and finally exhausted and feeling they needed vacation and they needed to do something to relieve it and they needed to go to a movie, they needed to get away. When I was with Phyllis, I got fed. And every time I saw something in me that made me start to burn out, I went right to it to examine it. Because I could see that if I could open to that thing which made me burn out and come back into a space which we're going to be talking about this afternoon, there would be a way to be with Phyllis in that space continuously, being fed, getting lighter, more present, more playful, more clear. Dream, possibly. But it feels very real and possible to me. And I think we collectively have the experiences to offer into the stew to figure out how to come up for air through the incredible process we are facing together here.
Ram Dass is speaking, I was thinking of the first time I ever sat next to somebody who was terminally ill, who was very, very sick. I'd been teaching with Ram Dass, this was about 10, 12 years ago, and Elisabeth Küblar-Ross had come to the retreat. We had a few minutes together, and it later developed that Elisabeth and I started working together. The first retreat that I went, Elisabeth asked me to come, and I thought, going to be there to show people who were working with patients, people in crisis, how not to burn out by meditative techniques that brought you directly in contact with the quality that was draining your energy so that the resistance around that could fall away and just the thing itself could be dealt directly with. One could really touch the heart of the matter, not leave the skid marks of resistance. Last day of the retreat, Elisabeth says, I want you to, and I had been with a dozen, maybe 20 people who were terminally ill, but I was in a role. I was very safe. I was the one who knew, and they were the one who didn't, and I was there for osmosis. But Elisabeth wasn't going to let me get away with that, luckily. She said, I'm going to go see a patient we were in Texas, in MD Anderson Hospital. She's the first woman, this was a long time ago, she's the first woman to have a marrow transplant to survive this long. She'd been alive about 15 days since the transplant. And I thought, remarkable. I'm going to get a chance to see a real expert, a really skillful person be with someone who's in crisis. I'm going to learn a lot. As we walked in the room, Elisabeth pulled a chair up next to the bed, and I was looking for where I was going to sit, and Elisabeth said, you're sitting here. And I sat down next to this translucent being, 28-year-old woman, in extremely advanced stages of leukemia. And as I sat down next to her, all my years of meditation, all my knowing just dropped away. I think at that moment I was probably closer to death than she was. I was terrified. And I saw how my fear touched her presence, her being, and wanted to change it. And it wasn't just that I wanted to relieve her pain, but that she was such an intense mirror for my own pain that I could hardly stand sitting next to her. I saw all my desires for control. All the places inside of me I wished I were Captain Karma and could touch her and take away her pain and then pose for my picture in the Houston Chronicle. An informal shot, of course. And as I saw the dull-wittedness with which I touched her pain, the old mind with which I touched her pain, I saw that with all the years of meditation, nothing had had such a direct impact to confront me with the holding in such an immediate situation. And I saw that the value of sitting next to her was to explore the suffering that keeps us separate and the suffering that kept her separate. It was too powerful an opportunity to let go. And really this work that I have found myself doing for many years has been as work on myself. When I first was with someone, in the first years, if I was with someone who was in very intense pain, sometimes it would break my heart. And sometimes I would find myself praying that their pain should be removed. Because I couldn't touch their pain. Because I couldn't touch my own pain with an okayness, I couldn't touch their pain with an okayness. And then one day I went to sit down next to a patient, a woman who was in agony. And I closed my eyes to pray, and the words simply couldn't come up, "Take this being's pain away." I realized how much ignorance was motivating that prayer. How did I know? The prayer choked in my throat. Now sometimes I'll sit next to someone who's in pain, and I'll close my eyes, and all I can pray is may they get from whatever this experience is the highest possible potential. May this enlighten them. May this free them. I no longer am so short-sighted that I second-guess God and think that someone's pain should be removed. I'm also not so free that when I see somebody settle back after pain leaving their body, that I too don't take a deeper breath. A woman we know was dying in the hospital. She'd lived her life in extraordinary separation. To such an extent that as she was dying, and with a rather bone metastasis cancer, in a lot of pain, her children wouldn't visit, none of her work associates would visit. And because she had lived her life in such anger and judgment, in such closed-heartedness, she was constantly blaming the nurses for her pain. She was blaming the doctors. And her room became such a place of anger and judgment and fear that she had no visitors. And the nurses took longer and longer to answer her call. They referred to her as the bitch on wheels in 41B. As her pain got worse, she had no place to turn. She had always touched with anger and hatred that which was dissatisfactory. And now it was her that she was touching with that. And the pain was becoming beyond unbearable. 6 weeks after she'd been in the hospital, the last month of which probably she was in almost complete isolation, because anyone who came in her room was met with such a barrage of mean-spiritedness that nobody wanted to be around her. One night, 4 a.m, absolutely unable to stand it any longer, jumping out of her skin, laying on her side, curled embryonic in the bed. Tremendous pain in her lower back, in her hips, in the back of her legs. All of a sudden, she gets the vision, but it's more than a vision, it's the body experience, it's the sense. And there she is laying on her side with this tremendous pain in her back, in her hips, in her legs, but it's not her. She's a woman, a dark-skinned woman laying on her side on a mud floor in a hut in Ethiopia with an empty breast at which is suckling a starving child. And the woman is dying, and the woman has tremendous pain in her back, in her hips, in her legs. Then all of a sudden she experienced herself as an Eskimo woman giving birth, in a complicated birth, dying with tremendous pain in her back, in her hips, in her legs. She said in the course of that evening, she touched the 10,000 women in pain, dying at that moment. Image after image, experience after experience arose. And she came out of it saying that she realized that it wasn't my pain that she was experiencing, it was the pain. That she had come from the separateness which pain often throws us into, and had found in that separateness the universal. And as she stopped seeing it as my pain and started seeing it as the pain, we saw a healing beyond compare. Her heart became so open. She lived 6 weeks more after this experience. In the course of that 6 weeks, her room started to be the place that the nurses would go on their break, because it was the most revitalizing energy in the hospital. Her children came to visit. She met her grandchildren for the first time. A few days before she died, one of the nurses brought her a picture of Jesus as the good shepherd with the children and the animals. And this woman, whose heart had been like a rock, seemingly, before, looked at this picture of Jesus and the children and looked into the picture and said, "Oh, Jesus, have mercy on them. They're only children." She was healed and died 3 days later. Not my pain, but the pain. Those people we know who are working with healing seem often to come to the place, healing the body, seem often to come to the place where they recognize that there is no such thing as just healing my body. It is healing the body we all share. Entering the shared heart to experience the shared pain in the body we all share. Many people that I know who are working with healing, just as at the end of Buddhist meditation, as you may know, one shares the merit. You know, you're not elbowing your way into heaven. The path is not that narrow. In fact, it has no edges. Many people who I know who are doing healing meditations, at the end of their meditations, send it out to all sentient beings. The pain in their knee is the pain in all those 10,000 knees. 200,000 people die each day on this planet. So when you're laying there in your pain, you're absolutely, concretely not alone. And it seems to be the shared healing, finding in the separate, the universal, that seems to be one of the remarkable primary stages in letting the healing in trusting that healing doesn't have to do with life and death. It has to do with just this much, just this moment, the heart of the moment. And I think all of our work is to let the healing in. Not to think it, not to presuppose it, not to have a model of it, but to open to it, to let it in.
That meeting of those, support meeting of those buddies, volunteers last week, it turned out that all of the people that happened to be gathered in that group were gay. That's not true, obviously, of all support groups. It just happened to be of that group. And I'm bisexual, and I've lived in the gay community for many, many years. And I looked around at this group of people, and I realized that in the past, I would have been in the room with this group, and the dominant criterion, judgmental criterion, would be sexual attractiveness. And since I was old and sort of irrelevant, I would have had all that separateness. I mean, I'm letting myself way out here. And I looked at each of them with the others, and I saw in them all the personality qualities that at one time each of them might have been very bitchy, very judgmental, very mean to each other around that sexual dimension. And what I saw was that the situation they were facing together was bringing out qualities in each of them and a way in which we were meeting that was healing all of us. In that we were being healed out of our separateness through our shared caring, through our shared heart. And I would bet if I took a sample of people in this room, a preponderance of you would recognize just what I'm saying. And would realize that this intense moment of truth that we are coming together to reflect about is bringing forth in each of us qualities that are allowing us to be with other human beings in a way that is healing. We're being healed out of a sickness of a society. It's a collective sickness. It's not a personal sickness. It's a sickness of separateness, of isolation, of paranoia, of loneliness, of desperate gathering of things to hide from the loneliness. And the intense reality of sickness, of death, of the unknown that we're sharing together on a windy hill in a dark night, moonless night. Suddenly we are alive again. We're alive again. How strange. How strange that it takes this kind of trauma to awaken us. How strong the socialization process was into our isolation. That it takes this drama to bring us back together. In a way, underlying these ideas is a very basic one, that life is an opportunity for growth. It's an opportunity for awakening out of an illusion of separateness, awakening out of separateness. And that once recognized, every life experience becomes grist for the mill, becomes the stuff through which you can awaken. Every bit of it. It's not just when you're sitting in meditation or sitting before a spiritual teacher or you climb the mountain in the Himalayas. It's when you deal with your parents. It's when you deal with the IRS. That's all the spiritual teachings. Those are all the chances for you to awaken out of the stuff that keeps you asleep, suffering, and in pain. It's all the opportunity. And at the simplest level, I'd say the statement is the antidote to burnout is the perspective that you are a growing being and that everything, including your own life and your own death and approaching death, is an opportunity to grow. But for that to work requires some kind of a philosophy, some kind of a perspective about this human life. I mean, if you figure that when you die, you're dead, and that's it, and that all you were your body, and that when your body decays, you decay, and when your body dies, you die. Why the hell would you want to grow at the time of dying? Grow for what? Towards what? Unless you suspected that that model you have in your mind, that you are your body, that you are your limited self, that you are that which is dying, may just be that, just a model, and that there's another possibility. Then you're going to look for the cracks, the veil, cracks between the veil, where you can stick your nose in between and see the possibility and figure out how to touch the place in yourself that is not just your body. Then it makes sense to use everything around you. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Because if you are just your body, and most of you are dealing with people who think that all the time, they are suffering intensely all through life, because they've got to milk from every second more, because that's all there is. And if they don't get it now, there's nothing, and get more and more and more, because you're going to be dead. And it's scary. It's very frightening. It's one of the fellows, the volunteers, that said to me last week, he said, my problem in dealing with my buddy, the fellow I work with, is that he's my age, and I feel that I don't want to lose all those opportunities for life experiences by dying young. And in a way, the deepest pain is for people who have not yet touched the possibility that they are more than their bodies. That's the deepest pain. Because the body, even in somebody that is incredible, I mean, you look at somebody who's at the height of their powers and health and virility and the cultural heroes, and you know they're decaying at this very moment. It's built into the system. I mean, Buddha's basic teaching was, everything's changing. If you cling to that which changes and try to hold on to it, you're going to suffer. It's built into the system. How can you not suffer? I mean, I have a stock at the moment. I'm not supposed to collect money, but somebody gave me a stock. And the stock went way up. And suddenly, from being somebody who was poor, I was somebody who was rich. I mean, it just happened like this. It just happened strangely. I thought, okay, I'll be rich. I mean, it's relatively rich. It's not rich. I mean, it's not like Bhagwan Rajneesh. So I started to feel like I was rich. It didn't change anything, but I felt like I was rich, you see. This morning, I was looking for a bun to have. We were at the hotel and we went out looking for a cinnamon roll or something. We walked into the Safeway, which is the only place we could find. It wasn't a French bakery or anything. It was just a Safeway. It was going to be very simple and humble. But I was feeling rich and expansive, and I could certainly buy a cinnamon bun. And my eye flashed across the newspaper, and it says, biggest stock drop in years, 40, and suddenly I lost my appetite. I didn't want the cinnamon roll. Just like that. Suffering from clinging.
Ramdas is touching on something that I think, particularly in the context of AIDS, is unmistakably clear. The youth, this disease is very non-discriminatory, but it seems right now in this country to be affecting people who've only been alive a few decades. Many of the people who have it aren't even halfway through their life expectancy. I don't know what the percent. I would guess that most of the people who have it are not halfway through their life expectancy. There's no, in my experience, someone may know of something, but in my experience, working for 10 years with the terminally ill, I know of no other situation like this that's ever evolved. A disease that at this point is particularly touching young people. Young people, I mean anybody younger than 48. I don't know why I chose that age, of course, other than that I'm 48. Kids. And next year it'll be everybody under 49. You know that one.
It's okay, Sonny.
There is, in this culture, in most cultures, when death approaches or illness or pain approaches, a particular kind of recoil when it's happening to someone young. The death of children, for instance, is considered the greatest of tragedies. Many people who find themselves ill are lamenting not just that they're ill, that their social life is cut down, that their activities are cut down, but that it's happening so soon. Of course, everyone who's ill thinks it's so soon, but for many of these people, they've only been alive 25 years, 35 years. And a tremendous anger arises, a feeling of being cheated. And that anger has a tendency to surround their pain and make it very difficult to open around their pain to let the healing in. There's nothing to judge in that anger. Of course it's there. Naturally, it's there. But uninvestigated, it burns our heart. It makes our pain inaccessible. So much self-hatred gathers around the pain. We're hanging out with a fellow who had AIDS many years ago, a fellow by the name of Bill. He'd come to some retreats. The first retreat he came to, he was pretty ill. He had, I think, some lesions showing then. I think he'd had some involvement with opportunistic infections. And in the course of the retreat, Bill, quote, got it. He saw his priorities change. He saw he wasn't just the body. He saw the power of touching with mercy all that he had touched so many 10 billion times before with fear and aversion. He started to open. And as he started to open, the first thing he came across, of course, was the confusion around the illness and the pain in his body. And he started to open to it for the first time in his life, maybe. And maybe for the first time in his life, he started to meet his pain with loving kindness instead of hatred.
Be here now.